Right, good afternoon everyone. I'm amazed you decided to come here rather than sit in the sun. So thank you very much for turning up. My name is Martinson. I first started taking pictures in Hackney when I was still at school, which was a very long time ago. And the first pictures I took were around 1970. Obviously I was in primary school then. And what I'm going to do today is take you through some of the pictures I took in the 70s and 80s, but also the work I've been doing over the past 5 years. What I've been doing is revisiting some of the themes and some of the ideas that I looked at mostly in the 1980s, some in the 1970s. The thing about the work I've done in the last 5 years, it was interrupted for 2 years by the pandemic. I didn't take any pictures then in Hackney. Didn't want pictures of people wearing masks, particularly. And what I'm going to do is talk about a number of different themes using photos. Some of it, surprisingly, is going to be about globalization. Some of it will touch upon love, climate change, celebration, and a range of different issues. And we're going to start, in fact, with this one, but to give a bit of context, a lot of pictures I took in the 70s was for community newspapers in the days before digital, before people had phones and stuff like that, where the only way you could really communicate was with print and newspapers. So I worked on a lot of community newspapers. I was also heavily involved with Centerprise, which was a publishing project in Dalston and then Kingston High Street. And that was very much about telling the stories of local people. So it was about history. There was also people writing their own stories about their own lives. And I took a lot of photographs around that. I also did a lot of work with trade unions in Hackney. And there's certainly at least one person here who will be able to probably correct me when I get things wrong. In fact, there's several people who can correct me when I get things wrong. And you're very welcome to do that at the end. But this is one of the first pictures I took. And this would have been on the way to Brick Lane or Petticoat Lane, which obviously was a big Sunday tradition, and still is a Sunday tradition. And I actually got an email from somebody whose parents are in the picture. And it's the guy with the hat, the trilby, and the woman next to him. The guy was called, I need to look up my note now, Harry Britton. And he was known as a birdman because he used to buy and sell songbirds in Brick Lane when it was a live animal market. It was eventually made illegal. But that tradition actually came from the Huguenots, who kept songbirds. And they were sold on the basis of how pure their song was. So the greater purity, the more valuable was the bird. It was completely illegal, but this guy apparently made quite a lot of money from it. So I thought I'd go back. This was just before the pandemic. So this guy, Andy, was the son of the woman that ran the cafe. Obviously the cafe had long gone, and he was trying to make money any way he could. So he went for Christmas trees. Now it's completely closed down. I have no idea where he's gone to, because I was in contact with him, but he disappeared. And some of the stuff I've done, the thing about taking pictures like this over a period of time in London, some of it's very transient. People move on, you lose touch with them, whatever. Again, this is one of the first pictures I took in Abbey Park Cemetery, and I was 17, 18 when I took the picture. And I took it it because I like the kind of style of it and the framing. And at the time I took the picture, there were quite a lot of blokes who were wandering around the cemetery. And I really didn't know a lot about life then. And I just assumed they were looking for gravestones. As many of you know, they were looking for other men. Anyway, last year, the whole of the chapel at Hackney Park was opened, and it's now a place for weddings. So I went back, and I took a picture of the first gay wedding that took place. And I asked Oliver and Carlos what they would like to say about the picture and ceremony. And what they said was, a boy from the Peruvian mountains meets another from the cotton mill land of northwest England. They get wed in a Victorian garden cemetery. This is our fairy tale. It was always in the back of our minds that civil partnerships and gay marriage were illegal just 20 years ago in the UK. We were gifted something called capes from our own friends' gay marriage, so that we could show our colours with pride and celebrate progress. So one of the things I've been interested in doing is trying to make connections across the decades where it's possible. And sometimes the pictures are, this was Cheshire Street Market, when people used to buy and sell stuff in basically wrecked buildings. And the significance of this picture is partly to do with hats. Because I went back to the same place, so you picture another man with a hat, where the meaning is quite different. So this is Bill Julian in Ridley Road Market, it's 1981. And this is his granddaughter. Now they no longer have a stall there, they ended up with a dispute with Hackney Council, which is not uncommon, I'm told. But when I talked to them, their family had been there since around the 1920s. And I interviewed her uncle. And he said when they first had stalls there, you didn't have a place. You'd line up, and then you'd have to run to get your pitch. And according to them, the people who got the best pitch were the best fighters. And having met their uncle, I wouldn't mess with him. So, Steve Clark, I took this picture because I did a picture there when there was a cafe. I'm not showing it today. And I also did a little interview with him. So he'd been working there since he was at school, since he was like 10 years old. He never really went to school. And he'd done everything, pots and pans, soaps, everything. And now he was selling suitcases. But one of the things he said to me, that he'd had his own pitch for 10 or more years. I'll work here till I die. Can't leave it. No one else can have it. Somewhat sadly, he did die. And this was the procession through the market. And everybody stopped and came out to that funeral. So there was among many of them this real sense of family as well. The Nightingale estate was where I lived with my mum and dad for a while, until I left home. And at that point there were 5 tower blocks. Or was it 6? 6, thank you, Ruth. I told you there were people in New York. And I had this idea. I thought, what I'll do is I'll take pictures of every single flat in the block. Right? As I said, I was quite young and very naive. I managed to get about 6 families. And that was one of them. And pretty much at that time, almost all of them were identical. I mean, this I call the migraine picture. So you had a television, formica table, refrigerator suite. And then I thought, actually, there's now one block left since the point. They were demolished in 1998. They didn't last very long. They were not well designed, there are all kinds of problems. So I thought, I'll go back to the one remaining block. It's not the same block, it's not the same people, just to see how things have changed. So this is Sharon and her daughter. So you can see there's no telly, but there's a lot more stuff. And that was a kind of continuing themes I went through. So the way the flats are designed, there are one-bedroom places, so for single people. And again, you can see, from my table, telly, three-piece suite, I think that's Coronation Street. This is Ted, who lives at Silver Point. And again, a hell of a lot more stuff. So I took some pictures of lightermen. And for those people who haven't heard the phrase before, lightermen took barges from the London docks, where they were unloaded from big ships into barges, took them up the River Lee, and it was coal, timber, and copper. Because the River Lee was lined with timber yards, coal yards for the power stations, and copper mills. And if you've been around, you would have seen signs that say copper mill, Stratford mill, whatever. And I was interested to see, well, what kind of work is now done on the river? Obviously, it's not the same, it's stopped a long time ago. And so, lots of people live on the river now. And this is Ziggy and Mikkel. They deliver coal for the people that live there, and gas for the people that live there, as well as wood. I thought I'd see who else could I find. But also I wanted to, this picture, there's a connection back here. So with this picture, I actually couldn't remember where I took it. So I posted it on the Facebook group. And a guy called John Deadman said actually it was Old Ford Lock above the northern outfall sewer. And this was about 2018. And I responded to him on the social media and I said, are you related to Alfred Deadman? Because I interviewed Alfred Deadman in 1974 for a book published by Centerprise, and he was also writing it. And he said, yeah, that's my dad. Okay. So I said, well, can I come and interview you? I never got a response. However, I did track him down last year. I'll show you a picture in a minute. So I was interested in what still happens there. This is the Canals and Rivers Trust cleaning it up. So these guys do props for film companies and events. They're actually on a site of what used to be a timber yard called Latham's. This guy, Aziz, sells dog treats. He actually now sells it from the van rather than the canal. And one of the things, again, which kind of comes through, I think, as we move through the presentation, is partly what are people spending their money on that they didn't spend their money on in the 1980s. And you'll see it's quite a lot. This guy's called Merlin, or he calls himself Merlin. He's a gypsy. That's how he describes himself. He lives in Kent in a house. But he does tarot readings. And he does them on the rivers, and he moves around a bit. He was doing it in Westminster until they cracked down on people like that. And I said to him, so how much were you making in Westminster? You know, he goes around Piccadilly Circus, that's the square. And he said, well, I can make 500 quid a day. Pretty good. Very good tarot reader, actually. I recommend him. His deal is he does it on a 6-month period. So not saying, I said, why did you do that? He said, well, you then know whether or not what I'm saying is accurate or not. So that was my tarot, and it was pretty accurate. I won't tell you what it is. So Lottie is a chugger. You know what chuggers are? Chuggers are people who raise money for charities. And she's actually doing that for the Canal Rivers Trust, which was surprising. And in fact, if you talk to most of the boat dwellers, they will not be very complimentary about the Canal Rivers Trust. So this is Baltic seafood. They move around the rivers because they have to move every 2 weeks. And although it says Baltic seafood, it's actually what he does. He's from Turkey, from Istanbul. He used to have a restaurant in Church Street. That kind of collapsed after the pandemic. And he told me that actually this kind of boat, there's hundreds of them around Istanbul. So, it's not quite Baltic seafood, but it's pretty good food. I do recommend it. So this is John Dedman. So he was the son of Alfred Dedman. He's now 88. He has a razor-sharp memory. And his father, in the interview, so his father worked in the 40s and 50s, talked about when 400 barges a day would go through Old Ford Lock. But John's a smart guy. He stopped being a lighterman in 1970. And I said, well, why was that? And he said, well, I could see the writing on the wall. I said, okay, so what did you do? Well, I went to Tilbury and got a job unloading containers. Because what was happening was the London docks were closing, big container ships were going to Tilbury, so lightermen were no longer needed. So Leslie's Matchbox Factory. Anyone? Right, okay, if you've been to my talk before, you're not allowed to answer this question. Right, why was it called Matchbox?
Small cars?
Yes, close. But why particularly Matchbox?
They fitted in matchboxes, surely.
They fitted in a matchbox.
That's right, they fitted in a matchbox. So they started that after the Second World War. For many years it was a very successful company, it employed a lot of people. I took their pictures there the year before it closed. They employed, at the peak, around 2,000 people, a lot of women, which you'll see. And so John Dedman would be going up and down this river, past the factory. And this is where globalisation comes in. Because when the factory closed, all of the equipment was moved to Hong Kong. So it carried on being made in Hong Kong, partly because it was then cheaper to move it around the world in containers. And also the labour was cheaper. It's now made in China, and the Matchbox brand is owned by Mattel, one of the biggest toy companies in the world. So at the time, I think globalisation wasn't particularly a phrase that was used, but actually unknown to us, or we just who knew this was what was happening. So John Dedman knew. The thing about the buses that you saw, they used to pick up women, mostly women, from their home, take them to work and take them back again. The shift system was organised around the school day, which was pretty smart. It meant they had an access to a labour force in a way that was convenient for the women who were working there. And typically, they were employed because, of course, it was known that women had delicate little hands. I'm sure the women here know this. And therefore could do all that kind of stuff. It also meant they got paid less than the men. So now it's been turned into apartment blocks, and what the developer did as part of what's known as a Section 106, this is where they say, we will give back to the community. Well, they gave back about 49 very small artist studios. And that's one of the artists. So that's what it looks like. And don't know if Tom is here. Yes, Tom is here. Tom lives there. on Saturday, because when I took the pictures, I noticed there was a fire warden walking around, because the cladding here is very similar to that used at Grenfell, and what is it, 7 years on, the remediation work hasn't been completed. Is that correct, Tom?
Hasn't been started.
Hasn't been started. So, the freehold is owned by the 4th Viscount Astor, who is worth about £130 million, has 18 companies, many of which are registered in tax havens. He's the second largest owner of freehold in the UK. So I first went to Lesmes in 1974 to take pictures for an exhibition called Women at Work, which was done with a group called Hackney Flashers. And we were doing that to look at the differences between what women were doing and what men were doing, particularly how much they were being paid. So what I wanted to do now was to kind of look at what kind of work the women are doing now that maybe they couldn't have done then. So Nicole has a tattoo business. She's actually a Kiwi. She's got a very successful business. She's very tough, I have to say. But also the whole thing about tattoos, when I was thinking about it, in the 70s and 80s, the only people that got tattoos were people in prison, or in the army, or people riding motorbikes. So I asked how much people spend for tattoos. And she said if she's doing a whole body, whole back of somebody, it could be between £5,000 and £8,000. So if you're thinking of that, start saving. And in terms of the roles, tea ladies, very common, lots of workplaces. This was actually Hackney Town Hall. So the Zan now drives a recycling truck. That would have been absolutely impossible in the 80s. Totally impossible. He's also a stand-up comic at night. And there were certain roles which women were just forbidden to do, including the priesthood. This is Holy Trinity Church in Dalston. And this is Laura Leeds, who is Holy Trinity Church moved to Haggerston. She's now the vicar there. She's also chair of Holy Trinity School, primary school. And the other interesting difference, I think, who can spot the difference? Quick, who can spot the difference? I haven't got lots of time.
She's got a hat on.
Always a joker. She's preaching from the floor. But some jobs and roles don't necessarily change that much. Tailoring was huge in Hackney.
Yes.
Around, I think in 81, there was about 12 to 15,000 people working here. And I did some work with the Garment Workers Union. Again, with some people sitting over there. And some of the changes that have taken place were utterly inconceivable. So this is Co-Kitchens in Dalston. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it.
No.
I have to say, it took me a while to get my head around it. Isabel is actually a student. She's doing neuroscience. It was a temporary job. So what you do is you go there and there's a screen and you can order your food. All the kitchens are behind that, so you don't see them. It's like dark kitchens. You don't see them. And the food comes out in these cubicle things. And you put a coat in, right? Now, if you talk to someone in the 70s and 80s, it was like, and there's a lot of things like the pictures I'm showing, it's like, oh, you've got to be joking, mate. That ain't possible. But there you go. And so, this is the sauna at Hackney Wick. And again, if you said, I tell you what, let's go and pose, sit in a tub of cold water. But interestingly enough, it's a community interest company. They do social prescriptions there. And one of the things, I can't remember her name now, talking to me, this young woman says, is that actually, in terms of people's mental health, it actually makes a real difference. So there's lots of interesting things happening. I also wanted to go back to certain locations, because sometimes you can see the changes. This was initial cleaning. And again, this was actually something for us, this picture. Huge laundry in Upper Clapton near the River Lee. Very heavy work, mostly women. It's now a self-storage space. And again, if you said someone to the 80s, I tell you what, I know where you can store all your stuff and pay for it. What? And I wanted to look at how work had changed and jobs had changed. I actually went here because I thought I'd get some pictures of kids playing. So I wanted to try and get pictures of kids playing outside. And there was this guy who is 44 years old. And the reason he's here, he runs an online magazine about skateboards and makes a living for it. So Andrew is also known as Tattoo Boy Pole, or Pole Boy, one of those. So he's a pole performer, and he teaches that as well. And as you can see, he has half a leg. And again, it's something which is like inconceivable in the 70s and 80s on so many different levels. Jerry's a dog walker, you probably see lots of them. Are there any dog walkers here before I say anything that's going to put my foot down? Any people that have dogs? Yeah. So anyway, again, paying someone to walk dogs, right? I asked him if there was anyone who he walked the dogs for a lot more than 1 day a week or something, and if so, how much they pay him. And he's a really nice guy. I'm sure he'll be very lovely with your dogs. And yeah, there's a few people that would get paid 150 quid a week to walk their dog, which I found extraordinary. But maybe that's just me. So, the gig economy. I'm going to have to rush through some of these because I get told by Janet. How long has the gig economy been around? It's always been around. So Mrs. Fulano was from Nigeria. This again was 1975. And sewing, piecework. This is Anna, delivering food. What I worked out, if you adjust for inflation, she's getting paid the equivalent of what that woman was in 1974. So Anna's getting paid about £3 an hour for delivering food. And the other thing as well that's very different, whereas for the home worker, there'd be a van coming from a place somewhere in Hackney that would deliver the stuff you needed to sew and then take it back to someone in Hackney. Anna's work is determined by an algorithm that's probably designed in California. Simpson's was a huge tailoring company in Kingston High Street. Anyone know the building? Big building. So it's now beyond retro. And Matthew was working in Beyond Retro when I went there. And again, there's no way he could have walked down the street in the 80s looking like that. Not without a great deal of hassle. And actually, I'll just read what he says. He's quite interesting. I think Hackney is used to quirky people and everyone is different. I think these earrings are too much for someone in Windsor, that's where it comes from. Hackney is more accepting. You don't tend to feel eyes on you, you just feel more comfortable. So the thing about the Simpsons building, beyond retro, is vintage clothing. So that's great, isn't it? That's pretty cool. It's actually owned by a Canadian company. And they're quite small, to be fair. and they don't make a huge amount of profits, but actually a huge amount of administrative expenses goes back to Canada. So Simpsons is a massive building. At the back of the building are apartments. The apartments are actually owned by a Turkish billionaire who doesn't pay tax in this country. And during the pandemic, the tenants, who were mostly freelancers, tried to get rent reduction. They tried to get other things changed because actually they had no work. They managed to get nothing from the landlord, built to the landlord. And Jordan, they were threatened with eviction and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, they went through the setup and issued a counterclaim against the landlord. And a few weeks ago, 15 tenants were awarded £250,000 because the landlord had not complied with HMO regulations and a load of other regulations. But again, this is a building which at one point, I think at its height, employed 2,500 people. So they would have lived and worked mostly local. They would have spent most of their money locally. The company was a British company. They would have paid taxes in the UK. And now, all of that goes out of the country. So you might see there's a theme working here. The other place I thought I'd go back to was what was a synagogue in Stamford Hill in Alice Park, a liberal synagogue. I did some pictures there for a book about Jewish life in the 80s. And when I went back, this was exactly the same place. It was being protected by guardians, as they're called. These are people who live in places temporarily for low rents to stop it being squatted. And they turned it, as you can see, into a bit of a party place. Right, this is Holy Trinity Church in Dalston. You might know they have a clown service there. That's been going on for about 80 odd years, I believe. And they still have a clown service, which is rather wonderful. So, there was a talk earlier about corruption in Stoke-Newington Police, or should have been with Duncan Cabot, but made it. There was a huge amount of stuff going on in the 80s in terms of what was happening with the black community, harassment from the police. One of the big cases that took place was Newton Rose. He was found guilty of murder. There was a campaign because actually what the campaign said was that he'd been framed, and he was released on appeal after 2 years. Erkin is the spiritual leader of the mosque in Shacklewell Lane. And the connection here was that he told me he served 6 years in prison because he said he was also framed by Stoke-Newington Police. He was also released on appeal after 6 years. And the mosque is incredibly popular. When I went there must have been 200 men there, something like that. But the other connection is it used to be a synagogue. As you can see on the left. And in fact, when I was at Hackney School, the first year I was there, because I didn't really know who I was, but I was Jewish, I went there for kosher school meals. It was only 1 year because the meals were horrible. So Margaret Thatcher famously said in the 80s there's no such thing as society. And there was a huge crackdown on benefits. This was one of the protests against what were called specialist plain squads. They were sent in to dig out people who they thought were fiddling the benefit system. This is partly why it's called Echoes Through Time. So this is Mari. Mari has cancer. You can see how swollen her legs are. She has a heart condition. When I took this picture, she had just lost her personal independence payments. It was a period.
Depends if you want questions.
Yeah, okay, we'll see how we go. You can revolt as well today. And I can tell you now, with what's being proposed for Pip, she will not get it. Right, we have to go quickly. Okay, protest. Always been protest in Hackney. It's called democracy. Down the road, very, very busy. 1973, they want it closed. More recently, low traffic neighbourhoods. People don't like it because it's going down Brown Road where these kids live. So, echoes from time. No nursery cuts. No nursery cuts. Nurses on strike. Lots of strikes in the 80s. This was Bethnal Green Hospital, now closed. This is Home and Sutton Hospital. Hackney Fair's Fair, big protest. This was about reducing fares in London, which was a very successful policy until it got overturned by Conservative-controlled Bromley Council because they didn't have a tube line. And in Dalston, delivery riders protesting, exactly the same place, but obviously very different. One was about something that was around collective action that affected everybody in London, and very much about individual consumerism. De Beauvoir Square, they're protesting because the people who lived in the big houses around there didn't want the children from the school using the playground during the day because it was a bit noisy. And outside Hackney Town Hall, protests around what's happening in Gaza. Aha, right, I want to do something about community, different aspects of community. This is ex-our elders, so they do amazing stuff, protesting outside Barclays, BP, and the rest of it. So I want to look at different aspects of community. And climate change. So, February a year ago, Hackney Wick got flooded. So Emily's flat, or her workshop, and also where she lives got flooded, as did dozens of homes, because the River Lee overflowed, because the Canal and Rivers Trust didn't open a lock. One of the things which is really shocking, I think, is the way in which what's become normalised now is that we have food banks, we have people that have to go to different places because they can't afford to get the food they need. This is Hackney Food Bank in Church Street, but some are very different models. This is Euphemia, she's in Woodbury Downs. This was set up during the pandemic. People pay £5 and they get a whole load of fresh food. This is a Kingsmead estate. Again, a different model. People pay £10. They get about £40 worth of food. A lot of it is fresh, and actually you can make whole meals from them. Unlike the food bank stuff, which is 3 days' worth of mostly tin food. And Frankie is one of the key people in the organisation of that on the Kingsmead estate. Afro-Caribbean Centre in Stoke Newton has been going for 40 years. They do a lunch club every single day. This is in the kitchen there. Right, Rico. This is Woodbury Downs estate development. Rico lives on the right-hand side of the street in social housing. The left-hand side of the street is private, rented and bought. He told me how, when there was a big snowfall a couple of years back, when they came to clear the snow, guess what side of the street they cleared? I kid you not. And in terms of normalisation, this is a baby bag. So this is where people donate stuff for families with babies. Again, extraordinary normalised this. So Gideon and Esther are the Haggerston wildlife gardeners. And what they do is they go to the spaces in between the public and private, which nobody really owns, and turns them into wildlife gardens. And they've been doing a lot of that voluntarily. And there's actually loads of people doing stuff like that, which I'm going to continue to take pictures of. Right. I also want to do something about what remains. So Norris makes leather jackets by hand. He used to do it for John Lewis. He had quite a big business. He's actually works every day. He's now 84. William G. They've been in Dalston since 1906. And one of the other aspects which is different, there's a lot of people who work for them, 20 or 30 years, which is pretty unusual because so many workplaces now, it's really short periods of time people work for. This is Frieds of London. They make ballet shoes by hand. They're on-piece work. It's quite an old school setup. Every one of their ballet shoes has a mark from the person who made them. So this guy's mark is the X there. And a lot of ballet dancers insist on having their shoes made by a particular maker, as they're called. And you can see that it is pretty old school there. They're actually owned by a Japanese company, the fourth largest retailer in Japan. And half of what they make goes to the United States. So that is now subject to a 10% tariff. So don't think it doesn't affect us here. Bill Wakeman works in a foundry. He was apprenticed to work in this foundry. They make railings specifically for particular buildings. It's pretty hard work. It's quite dirty work. Those apprenticeships don't exist anymore. And it's pretty dangerous work as well. Gary, who's here, has been in business for 40 years in Stoke Newington, and they make violins and cellos and other instruments by hand. And sometimes this can take months. And I'm sure Gary will tell people about it afterwards. Thank you for coming. Shoreditch. Shoreditch used to be the centre of the furniture industry in London, pretty much. Again, hundreds, if not thousands of people working there. And one of the things that's happened in Hackney, as it's happened across the whole of inner London, is the demographics have changed profoundly. So in Hackney, 1 in 4 of everybody living in Hackney is aged between 25 and 36. In some other boroughs, it's higher than that. So what you've got is a lot of housing that is designed for them. Yeah. But the other thing you haven't got is enough children. So this is Debovo School. It's one of 4 schools that were closed last year. 4 more are going to be closed this year. This is the last ever class in the school. Rebecca, the head teacher, is here. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And I took a picture of the last day in the school. It was very moving, very emotional, because the school is a community. And when it closes, lots of things get broken up. And you get a sense of the spirit of the school, I think, by the relationships between the people there. And the whole school is empty. So the school that was built in 1899 has survived 2 world wars and 2 pandemics. The other thing which is kind of interesting, which I looked at today, all of the 8 schools being closed are local authority schools. I'm not sure how the numbers stack up, but there are actually 8 academy primary schools which opened at various times over the past decade or so. So there is, I think, possibly an interesting issue there to look at. So the nature of teaching has changed. This is William Packard School in 1974. This was for a book by Centre Prize. kids sitting around, teacher playing guitar, pretty casual. When you're at school now, and he's a great teacher, he's clothes, whiteboard. That's got a bit small, I don't know why. But if you've got good eyesight, yeah, almost there, promise. On the left, 74, kids walking to school, not an adult in sight. Kids walking to school, adults everywhere. And boys will be boys, won't they? This was the Clittle Park School, which became Stoke Newington School, lads, and this is Stoke Newington School now. Because one of the things I'm trying to do as well is look at changes in attitudes and behaviours, and sometimes you get that, maybe, you can tell me I'm not. Girls playing, hula hoops, skirts, football trousers. So this was the first ever street theatre to come to Hackney. It caused complete bewilderment among locals in 1973. Never seen street theatre before. And this is outside the Divine Club in Stoke Newington. It's after a drag night. And you might notice the two guys behind looking somewhat bewildered by it. And festivals. Hackney Marsh Fun Festival, good old boys, having a drink. And festivals have really changed. This is a group called Para Festival. So it's about inclusivity of people with different abilities, disabilities and needs. Hackney Carnival. Obviously a lot more colour nowadays. This is not quite a festival, it's an event that takes place every 28 years, when mostly Reggie Jews believe that the sun appears in the same place as when the earth was first created. So I was very lucky to get this picture because it's only every 28 years. I can't remember when the next one is, but it's quite a long way away. And this is Purim, which has changed dramatically over the years. It's become a really, really big event in Stamford Hill. Incredibly colourful. Now if you're wondering why I don't have much hair, this was the last picture. And we'll finish on that one. Thank you very much for listening and turning up.